Hi there, and welcome back to our daily reading from the Oz books. We are in day 3 of reading The Royal Book of Oz by Ruth Plumley Thompson. Yesterday's reading, we had the Scarecrow falling down into the earth from his beanpole and landing in a group of people who called him their emperor and their ancestor. Meanwhile, Dorothy found that the Scarecrow was no longer in the Emerald City, so she and the Cowardly Lion go to find him in his home in the Winkie country. But discovering he's not there, they decide to go back to the Emerald City to look in Ozma's magic picture and find out where he is. But on the way, they fall asleep outside the city of outside the kingdom of Pokes. So let's go ahead and continue our 2 chapters today and see what happens today. So this is chapter 5, Sir Hokus of Pokes. It was long past sunup before Dorothy awoke. She rubbed her eyes, yawned once or twice, and then shook the Cowardly Lion. The gates of the city were open, and although it looked even grayer in the daytime than it looked at night, the travelers were too hungry to be particular. A large placard was posted just inside. "This is Pokes. Don't run, don't sing, talk slowly, don't whistle. Order of the Chief Poker," read Dorothy. "How cheerful! Ha ha hum!" "Don't," begged the Cowardly Lion, with tears in his eyes. "If I yawn again, I'll swallow my tail, and if I don't have something to eat soon, I'll do it anyway. Let's hurry. There's something queer about this place, Dorothy. Ah. Stifling their yawns, the two started down the long, narrow street. The houses were of gray stone, tall and stiff, with tiny barred windows. It was absolutely quiet, and not a person was in sight. But when they turned the corner, they saw a crowd of queer-looking people creeping towards them. These singular individuals stopped between each step and stood perfectly still. And Dorothy was so surprised at their unusual appearance that she laughed right in the middle of a yawn. In the first place, they never lifted their feet, but pushed them along like skates. The women were dressed in gray polka-dot dresses, with huge poke bonnets that almost hid their fat, sleepy, wide-mouthed faces. Most of them had pet snails on strings, and so slowly did they move that it looked as though the snails were tugging them along. The men were dressed like a party of congressmen, but instead of high hats, wore large red nightcaps, and they were as solemn as owls. It seemed impossible for them to keep both eyes open at the same time, and at first Dorothy thought they were winking at her. But as the whole company continued to stare fixedly with one open eye, she burst out laughing at the unexpected sound, for no one had ever laughed in Pokes before. The women picked up their snails in a great fright, and the men clapped their fingers to their ears, or the places where their ears were under the red nightcaps. "These must be slow pokes," giggled Dorothy, nudging the Cowardly Lion. "Let's go to meet them, for they'll never reach us at the rate they are coming." "There's something wrong with my feet," rumbled the Cowardly Lion, without looking up. "Oh, what's the use of hurrying?" The fact of the matter was that they couldn't hurry if they tried. Indeed, they could hardly lift their feet at all. "I wish the Scarecrow were with us," sighed the Cowardly Lion, shuffling along unhappily. "He never grows sleepy, and he always knows what to do." "No use wishing," yawned Dorothy. "I only hope he's not as lost as we are." By struggling hard, they just managed to keep moving, and by the time they came up with the slowpokes, they were completely worn out. A cross-looking poke held up his arm threateningly, and Dorothy and the Cowardly Lion stopped. "You," said the poke, then closed his mouth and stood staring vacantly for a whole minute. "Are?" He brought the word out with a perfectly enormous yawn. and Dorothy began fanning the Cowardly Lion with her hat, for he showed signs of falling asleep again. "What?" she asked crossly. "Under," sighed the Poke after a long pause, and Dorothy, seeing that there was no hurrying him, began counting to herself. Just as she reached 60, the Poke pushed back his red nightcap and shouted, "Arrest! Arrest!" shouted all the other Pokes, so loud that the Cowardly Lion roused himself with a start, and the pet snails stuck out their heads. "Arrest? Arrest is not what we want. We want breakfast," growled the lion irritably, and started to roar. But a yawn spoiled it. One simply cannot look fierce while yawning. "You," began the Poke, but Dorothy could not stand hearing the same slow speech again. Putting her fingers in her ears, she shouted back, "What for?" The Pokes regarded her sternly. Some even opened both eyes. The one who had first addressed them, covering a terrific gap with one hand, pointed with the other to a sign on a large post at the corner of the street. "Speed limit, 1/4 mile of an hour," said the sign. "We're arrested for speeding?" shouted Dorothy in the Cowardly Lion's ear. "Did you say feeding?" asked the poor lion, waking up with a start. "If I go to sleep again before I'm fed, I'll starve to death." "Then keep awake," yawned Dorothy. By this time, the Pokes had surrounded them and were waving them imperiously ahead. They looked so threatening that Dorothy and the Cowardly Lion began to creep in the direction of a gloomy gray castle. Of the journey, neither of them remembered a thing, for with the gaping and yawning Pokes, it was almost impossible to keep awake. But they must have walked in their sleep, for the next thing Dorothy knew, a harsh voice called slowly, "Poke him!" Greatly alarmed, Dorothy opened her eyes. They were in a huge stone hall, hung all over with rusty armor, and seated on a great stone chair, snoring so loud that all the steel helmets rattled, was a knight. The tallest and crossest of the Pokes rushed at him with a long poker, giving him such a shove that he sprawled to the floor. "So," yawned the Cowardly Lion, awakened by the clatter, "night has fallen." "Prisoners! Sir Hokus!" shouted the chief Poker, lifting the knight's plume and speaking into the helmet, as if he were telephoning. The knight arose with great dignity, and after straightening his armor, let down his visor, and Dorothy saw a kind, timid face with melancholy blue eyes, not at all pokish, as she explained to Ozma later. "What means this unwonted clamor?" asked Sir Hokus, peering curiously at the prisoners. "We're sorry to waken you," said Dorothy politely, "but could you please give us some breakfast?" "A lot," added the Cowardly Lion, licking his chops. "It's safer for me to sing," said the knight mournfully. Throwing back his head, he roared in a high voice, don't yawn, we're out of breath, begone, begone, or die the death." The Cowardly Lion growled threateningly and began lashing his tail. "If he weren't in a can, I'd eat him," he rumbled, "but I never could abide tinned meat." "He's not in a can, he's in armor," explained Dorothy, too interested to pay much attention to the Cowardly Lion. For at the first note of the knight's song, the Pokes began scowling horribly, and by the time he had finished, they were backing out of the room faster than Dorothy ever imagined they could go. "So that's why the sign said don't sing," thought Dorothy to herself. The air seemed clearer somehow, and she no longer felt sleepy. When the last Poke had disappeared, the knight sighed and climbed gravely back to his stone chair. "My singing makes them very wroth. In faith, they cannot endure music, it wakens them," explained Sir Hokus. "But hold, 'twas food you asked of me. Breakfast, I believe you called it. With an uneasy glance at the Cowardly Lion, who was sniffing the air hungrily, the knight banged on his steel armor with his sword, and a fat, lazy Poke shuffled slowly into the hall. "Pid, bring stew," roared Sir Hokus, as the Poke stood blinking at them dully. "Stew, Pid," he repeated loudly, and began to hum under his breath, at which Pid fairly ran out of the room, returning a few minutes with a large yellow bowl. This he handed ungraciously to Dorothy. Then he brought a great copper tub of the stuff for the Cowardly Lion, and retired sulkily. Dorothy thought she had never tasted anything more delicious, and the Cowardly Lion was gulping down his share with closed eyes, and both, I am very sorry to say, forgot even to thank Sir Hokus. "Are you perchance a damsel in distress?" Quite startled, Dorothy looked up from her bowl, and saw the knight regarding her wistfully. "She's in Pokes, and that's the same thing," said the Cowardly Lion, without opening his eyes. "We're lost," began the little girl, but there was something so quaint and gentle about the knight that she soon found herself talking to him like an old friend. She told him all of their journeys since leaving the Emerald City, and even told about the disappearance of the Scarecrow. "Passing strange, yet how refreshing," murmured Sir Hokus. "And if I seem a little behind the times, you must not blame me. For centuries I have dozed in this grey castle, and it cometh over me that things have greatly changed. This beast now, he talks quite manfully, and this kingdom that you mention, this Oz, never heard of it." "Never heard of Oz?" gasped the little girl. "Why, you are a subject of Oz, and Pokes is in Oz, though I don't know just where." Here Dorothy gave him a short history of the fairy country, and of the many wonderful adventures she had had since she had come there. Sir Hokus listened with growing melancholy. "To think," he sighed mournfully, "that I was prisoner here while all that was happening." "Are you a prisoner?" asked Dorothy, surprised. "I thought you were the king of the Pokes." "Odds daggers!" thundered Sir Hokus, so suddenly that Dorothy jumped. "I am a knight!" Seeing her startled expression, he controlled himself. "I was a knight," he continued brokenly. "Long centuries ago, mounted on my goodly steed, I fared from my father's castle to offer my sword to a mighty king. His name?" Sir Hokus tapped his forehead uncertainly. "Go to... I have forgot." "Could it have been King Arthur?" exclaimed Dorothy, wide-eyed with interest. "Why, just think of you being still alive!" "That's the point," choked the knight. "I've been alive, still, so still that I've forgotten everything. Why, I can't even remember how I used to talk," he confessed miserably. "But how did you get here?" rumbled the Cowardly Lion, who did not like being left out of the conversation. "I had barely left my father's castle before I met a stranger," said Sir Hokus, sitting up very straight, "who challenged me to battle. I spurred my house forward, our lances met, and the stranger was unseated. But by my faith, 'twas no mortal knight." Sir Hokus sighed deeply and lapsed into silence. "What happened?" asked Dorothy curiously, for Sir Hokus seemed to have forgotten them. "The knight," he said with a mighty sigh, "struck the ground with his lance and cried, 'Live, wretch, for centuries in the stupidest country of the world,' and disappeared, and here I am." With a despairing gesture, Sir Hokus rose, big tears splashing down his armor. "I feel that I am brave, very brave, but how am I to know until I have encountered danger? Ah, friends, behold in me a knight who has never had a real adventure, never killed a dragon, nor championed a lady, nor gone on a quest." Dropping on his knees before the little girl, Sir Hokus took her hand. "Let me go with you on this quest for the valiant Scarecrow? Let me be your good knight," he begged eagerly. "Good night," coughed the Cowardly Lion, who, to tell the truth, was feeling a bit jealous. But Dorothy was thrilled, and as Sir Hokus continued to look at her pleadingly, she took off her hair ribbon and bound it round his arm. "You shall be my own true knight, and I your lady fair," she announced solemnly, and exactly as she had read in books. At this interesting juncture, the Cowardly Lion gave a tremendous yawn, and Sir Hokus, with an exclamation of alarm, jumped to his feet. The Pokes had returned to the hall, and Dorothy felt herself falling asleep again. "Up, up, my lieges, and away! We take the field again for ladies fair. We fight today, and King! Up, up, my merry men!" shrilled the King, as if he were leading an army to battle. The Pokes opened both eyes, but did not immediately retire. Sir Hokus bravely swallowed a yawn, and hastily clearing his throat, shouted another song, which he evidently made on the spur of the moment. "Avaunt, begone, methinks, we'll sleep in 40 winks." This time the Pokes left sullenly, but the effect of their presence had thrown Dorothy and the Cowardly Lion and the Knight into a violent fit of the gapes. "If I fall asleep, nothing can save you," said Sir Hokus in an agitated voice. "Ah!" The Knight's eyes closed. "Don't do it! Don't do it!" begged Dorothy, shaking him violently. "Can't we run away?" "I've been trying for 5 centuries," wailed the Knight in a discouraged voice, "but I always fall asleep before I reach the gate, and they bring me back here. They're rather fond of me in their slow way," he added apologetically. "Couldn't you keep singing?" asked the Cowardly Lion anxiously, for the prospect of a 5-century stay in Pokes was more than he could bear. "Couldn't we all sing?" suggested Dorothy. "Surely all 3 of us won't fall asleep at once." "I'm not much of a singer," groaned the Cowardly Lion, beginning to tremble, "but I'm willing to do my share." "I like you," said Sir Hokus, going over and thumping the Cowardly Lion approvingly on the back. "You ought to be knighted." The lion blinked his eyes, for Sir Hokus's iron fist bruised him severely, but knowing it was kindly meant, he bore it bravely. "I am henceforth a benighted lion," he whispered to Dorothy, while Sir Hokus was straightening his armor. Next, the knight took down an iron poker, which he handed to Dorothy. "To wake us up with," he explained. "And now, Lady Dorothy, if you are ready, we will start on the quest for the Honorable Scarecrow. And remember, everybody sing! Sing for your life!" Chapter 6. Singing Their Way Out of Pokes. Taking a deep breath, Sir Hokus, the Cowardly Lion, and Dorothy burst out of the hall, singing at the top of their voices. "3 blind mice!" shouted Dorothy. "Across the plain!" shouted Sir Hokus. "I'm the Cowardly Lion of Oz!" roared the lion. The Pokes were so taken aback at the horrid sounds that they ran scurrying right and left. In another minute, the 3 were out of the castle and singing their way through the gloomy garden. Dorothy stuck to the 3 blind mice. Sir Hokus sang verse after verse of an old English ballad, and the Cowardly Lion roared and gurgled a song of his own making, which, considering it was his first attempt, was not so bad. "I am the Cowardly Lion of Oz. Be good, be gone, beware, because when I am scared, full fierce I be. Brar, rar, ruff, gruff, look out for me." The Pokes stumbled this way and that, and all went well until they rushed into a company of Pokes who were playing croquet. The slowness with which they raised their mallets fascinated Dorothy, and she stopped to watch them in spite of herself. "Don't stop! Sing!" growled the Cowardly Lion in the middle of a line. To make up for lost time, Dorothy closed her eyes and sang harder than ever, but alas, next instant she fell over a wicket. which so deprived her of breath that she could barely scramble up, let alone sing. As soon as she stopped singing, the Pokes paused in their flight, and as soon as they paused, Dorothy began to gape. Singing for dear life, Sir Hokus jerked Dorothy by the arm, and the Cowardly Lion roared so loud that the Pokes covered their ears and began backing away. "There was a night, come on," sang Sir Hokus, and Dorothy came, and in a few minutes was able to take up the three blind mice again. But running and singing at the same time is not an easy task, and running through Pokes is like trying to run through water. You know how hard that is. "Three blind mice, 3 blind mice. I can't sing another note, 3," gasped poor Dorothy, stumbling along while the Cowardly Lion was puffing like an engine. The Pokes in the garden had recovered from their first alarm and were following at a safe distance. The gates of the city were only a short distance off, but it seemed to Dorothy that she could not go another step. A large group of Pokes had gathered at the gates, and unless they could sing their way through, they would fall asleep and be carried ignominiously back to the castle. "Now," wheezed the Scarecrow of Hokus, "remember, it is for the Scarecrow." All of them swallowed, took a deep breath, and put their last remaining strength into their voices. But a wily Poke, who had stuffed some cotton in his ears, now approached, pushing a little cart. "Take," he drawled, and before Dorothy realized what she was doing, she had accepted a cone from the Poke. "Oh, why, it's Hokey Pokey," spluttered Dorothy, and with a deep sigh of delight, she took a large bite of the pink ice cream. How cool it felt on her dry throat. She opened her mouth for a second taste, yawned terrifically, and fell with a thud to the stone pavement. "Dorothy!" wailed Sir Hokus, stopping short in his song and bending over the little girl. The poor Cowardly Lion gave a gulp of despair and began running around the two, roaring and singing in a choked voice. The Pokes nodded to each other in a pleased fashion, and the Chief Poker started cautiously toward them with a thick, long rope. The Cowardly Lion redoubled his efforts. Then, seeing Sir Hokus was about to fall, he jumped on the knight with all his strength. Down crashed Sir Hokus, his armor clanging against the stones that paved the gateway. "Sing!" roared the Cowardly Lion, glaring at him fiercely. The fall wakened the poor knight, but he had not the strength to rise. Sitting on the hard stones and looking reproachfully at the Cowardly Lion, he began his ballad in a half-hearted fashion. The Cowardly Lion's heart was like to burst between lack of breath and fear, but making one last tremendous effort and still roaring his song, he bounded at the Chief Poker, seized the rope, and was back before this creature had time to yawn. "Tie it around your waist! Take Dorothy in your arms!" gasped the Cowardly Lion out of the corner of his mouth. Sir Hokus, though completely dazed, had just enough presence of mind to obey, and the next minute the Cowardly Lion, growling between his teeth like a good fellow, was dashing through the group of Pokes, the other end of the rope in his mouth. Bumpity bump, 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 bangity bang bang went Sir Hokus over the cobbles, holding his helmet with one hand and Dorothy fast in the other arm. The Pokes fell this way and that, and such was the determination of the Cowardly Lion that he never stopped till he was out of the gate and halfway up through the road they had so recently traveled. Then, with a mighty sigh, he dropped the rope, rolled over and over down the hill, and lay panting with exhaustion at the bottom. The bumping over the cobbles had wakened Sir Hokus thoroughly. Indeed, the poor knight was black and blue, and his armor dented and scraped frightfully in important places. Dorothy, considerably shaken, opened her eyes and feebly began singing Three Blind Mice. "No need," puffed Sir Hokus, lifting her off his lap and rising stiffly. "Yon noble beast has rescued us." Won't the Pokes come up here? Asked Dorothy, staring around a bit dizzily. They cannot live out of the kingdom, said the knight, and Dorothy drew a big sigh of relief. Sir Hokus, however, was looking very grave. I have failed my very first adventure. Had it not been for the Cowardly Lion, we would now be prisoners in Pokes, he murmured sadly. He then unfastened the plume from his helmet. It beseemeth me not to wear it, sighed the king mournfully, and though Dorothy tried her best to comfort him, he refused to put it back. Finally, she fastened the plume to her dress, and they went down to the Cowardly Lion. There was a little spring nearby, and after they had poured 6 helmets of water over his head, the lion opened his eyes. Been in a good many fights, gasped the lion, but I never fought one like this. Singing, bah! Noble sir, how can I ever repay you? Faltered the knight. Alas, I have failed in the hour of trial. Why, it wasn't a question of courage at all, rumbled the Cowardly Lion, greatly embarrassed. I had the loudest voice and the most breath. That's all. You got the rough end of it. Sir Hokus looked ruefully at his armor. The back was entirely squashed. Never mind, said the knight bravely. It is the front one presents to the foe. Now you're talking like a real knight, said Dorothy. A while ago you said yawn and beseemeth, and first thing you know, the talk will all come back to you. Sir Hokus's honest face shone with pleasure. Odds, bludgeons, and truncheons, little maid is right, he exclaimed, striking an attitude. And once it does, the rest will be easy. Don't say rest to me, begged the Cowardly Lion, getting slowly to his feet. Just thinking of it makes me yawn. Now, don't you think we'd better start off? If you're rested, began Dorothy. The Cowardly Lion put a paw over his ear and looked so comical that both Dorothy and Sir Hokus laughed heartily. If you're ready, amended Dorothy, and the 3 adventurers started up the steep road. The first thing to do, said the little girl, is to get back to the Emerald City as quickly as we can. At this very minute, Glenda, the good sorceress of Oz, in her palace in the Quadling country, was puzzling over an entry in the magic record book. This book tells everything that is happening in the world and out, and while it does not give details, it is a very useful possession. The Emperor of the Silver Islands, read Glenda, has returned to his people. Now who is the Emperor of the Silver Islands? She asked herself. She puzzled about it for a long while, and then, deciding that it had nothing to do with the fairy kingdom of Oz, she closed the book and went for a walk in the palace garden. Dorothy and Sir Hokus and the Cowardly Lion had meanwhile reached the first sign in the dim forest, the sign directing travelers to Pokes. 2 roads branched out through the forest, and after much debating, they took the wider. Do you suppose this leads us to the Emerald City? Asked the Cowardly Lion dubiously. Time will tell, said Sir Hokus cheerfully. Yes, murmured the Cowardly Lion. Time will tell. But what? And that's the end of our reading for today. Hope you enjoyed the story about them being in the kingdom of Pokes. Come back tomorrow and we'll read another 2 chapters and see what happens then. So until then, have a wonderful rest of your day.